I was there, at the dinner that marked the end of a year of hard work. The low lights in the room reflected on the impeccable cutlery, and conversations flowed in high tones, but without ever exceeding the limit of elegance. My gaze roamed the room, registering familiar faces, colleagues who shared the routine and, from time to time, the frustration of difficult days. She looked stunning, as always. Fitted black dress, carefully tied hair, the kind of presence that made people want to look twice. But my pride in having her by my side wouldn't last long. It was the moment I walked away to get another glass of wine that everything started to fall apart. Movement in the corner of the room caught my attention. A strange man, someone who was definitely not part of her usual circle, stood next to her, leaning in a way that seemed far too intimate. My steps hesitated. At first, I thought it was just a casual conversation, perhaps a long-time acquaintance. However, before I could look away, I saw the gesture that would drive an abyss between us. His lips touched hers, and she didn't pull back. Heat rose through my body, not as passion, but as anger. A mix of disbelief and pain that stole my breath for a moment. I approached with firm steps, determined to face what, until seconds ago, I would have sworn was impossible. I pulled her arm hard enough to break any argument that this was a misunderstanding. The words came out of me like sharp blades, as sharp as the feeling tearing through my chest. You're done for me right now. Our divorce will happen. You will not come near my children anymore, you traitor. The tension in the room was palpable. Their eyes, previously distracted, were now fixed on the scene. She tried to mumble something, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and despair, but I didn't want to hear it. The man next to her, surprised by my reaction, took a step back, as if trying to avoid the responsibility that was clearly also his. I, however, couldn't take my eyes off her, the woman who until then was my partner, my confidant, the mother of my children. How could she destroy everything in such a brutal way? I left there leaving behind confusion, embarrassment, and an open wound that seemed impossible to heal. But that night, something bigger began to unfold, something I hadn't imagined. That betrayal wasn't just a one-off mistake, it was the epicenter of a web of lies, secrets, and disastrous choices that would come to light in a devastating way. As I tried to pick up the pieces of my dignity and took the first steps to rebuild my life, the weight of the consequences for her and her lover began to take shape. What they didn't expect was that fate wouldn't leave it cheap. The actions they took that night would put them on a collision course with something much bigger. Secrets that had long been buried began to emerge, revealing the true faces of the people I thought I knew. And as they grappled with the impact of their choices, I found myself faced with an unexpected truth that completely changed the course of my story. Now, looking back, I see that the betrayal was just the beginning. The initial pain gave way to a journey of discovery, twists and turns, and a redemption I never imagined possible. But what really happened that fateful night? And how did each piece of this puzzle fit together to bring such unpredictable consequences? The silence in the room still echoes in my mind, but it is in the answers that the true essence of this story is found. Welcome to the channel where stories reveal the devastating impact of betrayal. Here, we do not support any type of infidelity. All stories are fictional and aim to show how wrong choices can destroy lives and relationships. Get ready to dive into an exciting, intense plot full of twists and turns. Now, take a deep breath and be ready to hear a story that will stir your emotions. Happy listening. Daniel and Clara seemed like the picture of an ideal couple. He, manager of a financial sector in a large company, had a firm and controlled posture, as if he had on his shoulders the responsibility of keeping everything in balance. Clara, on the other hand, was the expression of lightness and sensitivity. An amateur painter in her spare time and dedicated mother of 2 children, she seemed to charm everyone with her sweetness. The life they built together seemed perfect to those observing from the outside, a solid marriage of more than 10 years, educated children, and a cozy house that always felt like home to those who entered. The beginning of everything was like a classic novel. They met at a casual event, where Clara, still an art student, was presenting her first paintings, and Daniel, recently promoted at work, was looking for something to decorate his new apartment. He was enchanted by both the works and the artist. Clara, with her shy smile and the sparkle in her eyes that seemed to light up any room, was the spark Daniel never knew he needed. From that moment on, the two became inseparable. He made her feel safe, protected, as she helped him find the beauty in the little things he always overlooked. Over time, changes came. Their first apartment was small but cozy, and every detail carried a story: the hastily assembled bookshelf on their first weekend together, the paint stains that Clara left on the cushions as she worked on her paintings, and the simple but simple dinners, filled with deep conversations and laughter. When the children were born, life took on a different rhythm. Clara dedicated herself completely to motherhood, while Daniel immersed himself in work to ensure the family's financial stability. Despite the busy routine, they maintained a unique connection. Daniel had a habit of surprising her with flowers at the most random moments, and Clara would always wait for him at night, even if it was late, with a cup of tea ready and ears open to hear about the day. However, as with any marriage, time brought challenges. Long conversations gave way to discussions about bills and responsibilities, and small kindnesses began to feel more like a habit than a genuine gesture. The children, Lucas and Helena, were the great joy of the house. Lucas, aged 8, already demonstrated the same discipline as his father, while Helena, aged 5, was the little artist of the family, always spreading paper, colored pencils and creativity wherever she went. Clara often said that the two were the perfect balance between their personalities, a reflection of what they had built together. Daniel, although always busy with work, made a point of setting aside Sundays to spend with them. It was sacred: picnics in the park, board games or family movies. Still, there was something subtle, almost imperceptible, that hung in the air. Clara felt, in the quietest moments, a kind of emptiness that she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the lack of time for herself, since life as a mother and wife consumed almost all her energy. Maybe it was the absence of that overwhelming passion he had felt at the beginning of the relationship. Daniel, on the other hand, noticed his wife's distant looks, but never knew how to approach the subject. He believed that everything he did, long hours at the office, annual bonuses, and carefully planned vacations, were enough to show his love. Friday nights were reserved for the two of them. No children, no work, just Daniel and Clara. It was a tradition that they both tried to keep alive, even if, in recent months, the silences had become more frequent than the laughter. On one of these nights, sitting on the sofa with almost untouched glasses of wine, Clara tried to start a conversation that she had rehearsed several times in her mind. He said he was missing something, that maybe they needed to rediscover what brought them together. Daniel, a little uncomfortable, murmured that the routine was like that it was normal over the years. The conversation died there, with Clara forcing a smile and Daniel promising himself that he would think about the matter later. The company's annual dinner, then, emerged as a perfect opportunity for a break from the routine. It was always a grand affair, filled with formal conversations, endless speeches, and the chance for Clara to wear one of her favorite dresses, one of those she had bought years ago but rarely had occasion to wear. Daniel insisted that she accompany him, although Clara hesitated. "It will be good for both of us," he had said. She reluctantly agreed and spent the afternoon getting ready with more dedication than usual. After all, she wanted to feel beautiful, to remember what she was like before routine swallowed her up. When they arrived at the salon, everything seemed perfect. Daniel greeted coworkers with his usual confidence, while Clara took in the lavish decorations and excited faces around her. She, however, felt a little out of place, as if she were out of tune with that world. Sitting at the table, Clara played with the ring on her finger, lost in thought, while Daniel talked animatedly with a group of colleagues about a new company project. At that moment, Clara realized how much the distance between them had grown. It wasn't something that could be explained in words, but it was there, evident in the gestures, in the averted looks, in the absence of that connection that used to be so natural. Meanwhile, Daniel, even though he was busy with conversations, couldn't help but notice his wife's silence. He felt a pang of guilt, something he would never admit even to himself, for allowing them to get to this point. Dinner continued with its usual pomp. Laughter echoed from other tables, toasts were made, and Daniel tried, from time to time, to pull Clara back into the interaction. But something inside her seemed to be somewhere else, as if that night was an opportunity to rethink everything they had experienced, the choices they made and what they really wanted for the future. The atmosphere in the room was festive, but inside her there was a whirlwind of emotions that she still couldn't name. And it was in that context that destiny began to silently move its pieces, preparing the ground for the events that would change everything forever. The night continued to unfold in the grand hall, the lights even brighter as the music became a comfortable backdrop to the lively conversations. Daniel moved between groups of colleagues, his posture always composed, but with a watchful eye on the table where Clara remained seated. She had exchanged a few words with other executives' wives, polite smiles and superficial conversations that didn't fill the growing void in her chest. Every time Daniel looked at her, he noticed something in his wife's face that he couldn't name, but it seemed like a reflection of something absent. Maybe it was the tiredness of the routine, maybe a restlessness that he still didn't understand. Clara, in turn, felt a mixture of discomfort and introspection. She tried to keep up with the pace around her, but her mind wandered, revisiting moments in her life that had slipped through her fingers like grains of sand. It wasn't exactly sadness, but a feeling that something precious was slowly being lost, like a flame that wavered before going out. She forced herself to get up, walking over to the drinks table to get a glass of wine. As he waited, he felt a presence beside him, a face that seemed familiar, but not familiar enough to immediately remember where he knew it. The man was elegant, his posture relaxed, but with a penetrating gaze that seemed to analyze her every move. He smiled confidently, like someone who already knew the reactions he provoked in people. The conversation began with a banal comment about wine, but Clara realized that there was something in his tone that went beyond simple cordiality. He was one of the new marketing managers, someone Daniel had mentioned in passing a few times at home, but Clara hadn't paid attention to until that moment. The way he watched her was both disconcerting and attractive, as if he saw something in her that Daniel had stopped noticing. As they exchanged words, Clara felt a spark that she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just the conversation itself, but the way he seemed interested in every detail, as if every sentence of it had a special weight. At the same time, there was a twinge of guilt growing inside her, a voice that tried to remind her of where she was and who she was supposed to be with. But the attention he gave her was a stark contrast to the silence Daniel so often allowed to dominate their moments alone. Daniel, on the other hand, had engaged in a long conversation with the CFO, discussing projections for the coming year. He was distracted enough not to notice what was unfolding on the other side of the room. Meanwhile, Clara felt a mix of conflicting emotions. The man was witty, he made her laugh in a way she hadn't remembered in a long time, and the sparkle in his eyes was a dangerous mirror that reflected what she tried to deny herself, how much she missed being seen, missing being heard. But there was something about him that seemed calculated, like he knew exactly what words to use to disarm her. The night wore on, and Clara felt like she was being pulled into something that she knew was risky. When Daniel returned to the table, he found her more animated, although still distant. She mentioned her new acquaintance's name casually, but didn't realize that her tone unintentionally gave away more than it should have. Daniel didn't show jealousy, but the discomfort remained in him as an impression he couldn't ignore. He covered it with a smile, but something in the way she spoke about the man lit a spark of concern. Later, when people began to leave the hall and dinner was coming to an end, Clara went to the outside garden to breathe a little. The fresh air helped to clear his mind, but not enough to dispel the sensations that still pulsed in his chest. She leaned against one of the benches, looking at the city lights in the distance, when she heard footsteps behind her. It was him again, the man who seemed unwilling to leave her alone that night. He started talking about the beauty of the city at night, but soon changed the tone to something more personal, more direct. Clara hesitated, but couldn't move away. There was something about him that seemed irresistible, even though every logical part of her mind told her to go back inside and look for Daniel. Meanwhile, Daniel looked for his wife in the salon, feeling growing discomfort at not finding her. He asked some people if they had seen her, but no one could say where she was. That was when he decided to leave the room to look for her. As he turned the corner that led into the garden, he saw something that froze his steps and made the blood in his veins run cold. Clara was there, standing, and the man was close, closer than anyone should be to the woman he loved. Daniel watched enough to realize something was wrong. Their closeness, the way the man touched her arm, as if testing her limits. But the final blow came when he saw the moment the man leaned in and Clara, hesitantly but without backing down, allowed him to kiss her. Daniel couldn't contain his reaction. He walked forward with firm steps, anger brimming with every movement, and pulled Clara with enough force to leave her stunned. The words he said cut the air like razors, filled with a pain he never imagined he would feel. The man took a step back, surprised and visibly disconcerted, while Clara, with teary eyes, tried to formulate an explanation that would never be enough. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. The pain on Daniel's face, the embarrassment on Clara's, and the man's obvious discomfort created an almost unbearable tension. He looked at her one last time, the words stuck in his throat, and walked away, leaving behind not just a wedding, but a lifetime of memories that now seemed to have lost their meaning. What he didn't know at that moment was that the betrayal was just the beginning of something much bigger that was about to be revealed. Daniel drove through the deserted streets, his mind a whirlwind of emotions impossible to organize. Clara's betrayal had hit him like a blow, but now, instead of the initial pain, a feeling of silent revenge was beginning to take over. He needed answers, not just about what he had seen that night, but about everything that had led him there. He parked in front of the house that he had once considered his refuge and stared at the facade as if he were a stranger. The lights were off, but he knew Clara was inside. He took a deep breath before entering. She was sitting in the living room, her face pale, her hands shaking, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. The sound of the door opening made her look up quickly, her red, swollen eyes begging for a dialogue he didn't seem willing to offer. Daniel entered and closed the door behind him, walking to the center of the room with firm but controlled steps. He didn't say anything right away, letting the weight of silence hang in the air. Clara was the first to break it, her voice low and broken. "Daniel, I don't even know where to start, but, listen to me, please. It wasn't what it seemed. I know I made a mistake, but, it wasn't premeditated. I was confused, lost." Her words seemed to ricochet off an invisible wall. Daniel remained still, looking at her with a cold expression that showed nothing but disapproval. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, but each word carried an intensity that made Clara shudder. "Confused? Lost? Is this how you justify everything? I spent years trying to be everything you needed. I worked, I strived, I made sacrifices. And you choose to destroy everything. Why? Because you wanted to feel alive? Why did you think I wasn't paying attention anymore?" Clara tried to get up, but her legs felt too weak. She knew he was right, but his words, so filled with pain, went through like knives. "I never wanted to hurt you, Daniel. Never. I lost control. I don't know what happened to me." He gave a bitter laugh, full of irony, and shook his head. "Did you lose control? It seems like you lost a lot more than that. And now, what do you expect? That I forgive? For us to pretend nothing happened?" Her gaze begged for understanding, but there was something in Daniel's tone that was more dangerous than shouting. He was thinking, calculating, and Clara knew that was a bad sign. "I need to know everything, Clara. Every detail. No lies. Who is he? Since when? And why did you think it was a good idea to throw our lives away for someone like that?" Clara began to speak, hesitantly, as if each word were a monumental effort. He's just someone who showed up, Daniel. It doesn't mean anything. It was just a mistake, Daniel interrupted her, his voice now louder. Doesn't it mean anything? So why did she feel so comfortable in his arms? Why did it feel like this wasn't the first time? She lowered her eyes, unable to support the weight of his gaze. Because, it wasn't. I met him a few months ago, but I swear I never thought something like this would happen. It was a slip. It was stupid and wrong. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to control the anger that was bubbling inside him. Months? So you not only lied to me, but also to our children. For our family. You lied to everyone while playing at being someone else. Is that what you're telling me? Clara started to cry, the tears flowing out of control. I know there's no excuse, Daniel, but I love you. I have always loved you. I know this seems contradictory, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family. He walked away, pacing the room like a caged animal. You already lost, Clara. You lost when you decided I wasn't enough. When he decided that someone like him was more important than everything we built. And you know what's worse? I don't even know if you really understand what you did or if you're just sorry because you got caught. Silence once again dominated the room, until Daniel stopped and looked at her with a mix of pain and determination. You know who he is, don't you? You know exactly what he stands for. Clara was silent, hesitating. But before she could respond, Daniel continued, his voice filled with something she couldn't identify. He's not just a stranger, Clara. He's married, isn't he? He has a family. And do you know what I discovered? His wife works at the same company as me. She was at dinner that night. She saw everything. Clara's eyes widened, shock evident on her face. Daniel. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was there. He never told me anything about it. Daniel laughed again, but this time the laugh was cold, almost mechanical. Of course he didn't say. Because he knew that if you knew, you might think twice before destroying two families in a single night. She began to shake, her hands clenching the cup now forgotten in her lap. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to fix this. Daniel approached her, the anger giving way to something colder and more calculated. There's no way to fix it, Clara. But there is something you need to know. He's not who you think he is. He has a history, and I found out everything. He does this with other women. He gets close, destroys relationships and moves on, leaving chaos in his wake. Clara looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. That can't be true. He seemed so sincere. Daniel shook his head, disappointed. And you believed. You were just another victim on his list. And now, I have to deal with the consequences of all this, while he gets away with it. The weight of the revelation seemed to crush Clara, who now didn't know whether to cry for the betrayal she committed or for the humiliation of having been deceived in such a cruel way. Daniel looked at her one last time before leaving the room. You wanted the truth, Clara. Now you have. The only question left is, what are you going to do with it? And with those words, he left the room, leaving Clara alone with the weight of her choices and the pain of the consequences that were yet to come. Clara remained in the living room, the silence in the house almost deafening. Daniel's words echoed in his mind like an unbearable weight. She knew she had made a mistake, she knew she had destroyed the trust of a man who had always loved her, but the latest revelations left her even more lost. He felt a mixture of shame, anger, and sadness, but most of all, a deep emptiness. The man she had risked everything for was not who he seemed to be, and the truth of that burned hotter than any accusation Daniel could have made. She knew she couldn't sit there, but her feet felt stuck to the floor. After minutes that seemed like hours, he got up and went to the kitchen, as if some movement could relieve the pressure he felt in his chest. The sound of water filling a glass was the only thing that broke the silence. But not even the cold drink could erase the heat that shame caused him. Meanwhile, Daniel drove without a defined destination. The streets seemed empty, a reflection of how he felt inside. Clara's words hit him in disjointed fragments, but what resonated most was the idea that she had never truly understood the damage she had caused. He was exhausted, but not in body, his soul felt worn out, as if years of trust and love had been sucked away in a matter of days. Without realizing it, Daniel stopped in front of a small bar. It was the kind of place where people sought to lose themselves, and at that moment, that seemed like the only logical option. He came in, sat down in the far corner, and ordered a double whiskey. I didn't want company, nor answers. He just wanted to silence the pain that was throbbing in his mind. While drinking, his cell phone vibrated in his pocket. He hesitated before taking the device, already imagining it would be Clara. To his surprise, it was a message from an unknown number. The text was short and direct, "We need to talk. I know what happened. Can we meet?" Daniel frowned, intrigued. The signature was Molly, the name he now associated with the wife of the man Clara had been having the affair with. After a moment of hesitation, he typed a simple reply, "Where?" The response came almost immediately, with the address of a 24-hour coffee shop. Daniel finished his drink and left without saying a word to the bartender. The cold night air seemed to bring a modicum of clarity as he drove to the agreed location. Finding Molly wasn't part of his plan, but he needed to understand what else was hidden in that story. When he arrived, he saw a woman sitting in an inconspicuous corner. Molly was attractive, but the tiredness and tension were visible on her face. Daniel walked up to her, and she greeted him with a nod. He sat down opposite him unceremoniously, and for a moment they were silent, as if they were trying to measure each other up. "Thank you for coming," Molly began, her voice low but firm. "I know this must seem strange, but I needed to talk to you before making any decisions." Daniel just nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I know my husband and his wife were involved. I'm not going to pretend this is easy to say. But there's something else you need to know." Daniel narrowed his eyes, feeling his stomach drop. "More?" he almost whispered, not sure if he was ready for more revelations. Molly took a deep breath before continuing. "My husband is not an honest man. Not just in relation to marriage. He has a history of manipulating women, of using his position to get what he wants. And I'm not just talking about betrayals. There are complaints. Cases that never came to justice because he always found a way to silence the people involved." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you just leave him before all this happened?" Molly looked away, clearly struggling with her own emotions. "I tried. But he always found a way to trap me. Emotional, financial blackmail, you have no idea what he's capable of. When he found out about the affair with his wife, something changed. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about him continuing to hurt other people. And I knew I needed to act." The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel felt his anger boiling again, but now it was accompanied by a sense of urgency. "What do you want from me, Molly?" he asked finally. "I want justice. Not just for us, but for everyone else he hurt. I know you must be focused on what happened between you and your wife, but this goes beyond that. It needs to be exposed, and I think together we have what we need to do that." Daniel sat back in his chair, processing what he had just heard. The idea of joining forces with Molly seemed absurd, but at the same time, it made sense. He couldn't undo what Clara had done, but maybe he could make sure this man didn't continue to wreak havoc. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "I don't know what it's going to be like, but I'm in. He won't get away with it." Molly looked relieved, but also determined. "Thanks. Let's do this the right way." She stood up, leaving Daniel alone to process the mountain of emotions building up inside him. He knew there was still a long way to go, both to face the ghosts of what happened and to deal with the woman who was once the center of his world. But now, he had a purpose. And that was all he needed to start rebuilding. The night air felt heavier as Daniel walked back to his car after his date with Molly. The conversation still echoed in his mind, each word of it carrying an uncomfortable truth and a weight that he now carried. There was something viscerally unsettling about knowing that the man who destroyed his marriage was doing the same to other people, but what disturbed him most was the fact that Clara had been a piece in this cycle of destruction. He didn't know if the desire for justice was for her, for himself, or just because he couldn't bear the idea that the man would get away with it. Upon arriving home, Daniel found Clara still awake, her red eyes showing that she hadn't slept. The silence between them seemed thicker than ever. He knew words needed to be chosen carefully, but exhaustion and frustration made him want to be direct, brutal if necessary. She stood up slowly, hesitantly, as if afraid that any movement might break something fragile and irreparable between them. He approached, but kept a calculated distance, like someone not ready to cross any line. "I found Molly." The sentence hung in the air, and Clara froze. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Daniel continued, his tone controlled but with a hint of bitterness that she recognized immediately. "Looks like your friend isn't just a traitor. He's a manipulator, a liar, and from what she told me, someone who has destroyed lives before. I thought the problem was just between the two of us, but now I realize it's much bigger." Clara finally managed to speak, her voice so low it was barely heard. "I didn't know, Daniel. I had no idea. He never told me anything about it." Daniel laughed, but it was a humorless laugh, filled with incredulity. "Of course. Do you think someone like him cares about revealing his true intentions? He saw in you what he needed. An opportunity. And you fell." Clara lowered her head, silent tears streaming down her face. The weight of his words was unbearable, but she knew he was right. Still, there was something in his voice that indicated he was beyond anger. He seemed distant, as if he were looking at her from a place where no emotional ties remained. Daniel sat up, finally allowing some of the tension to leave his shoulders. "Molly and I decided to do something about it. He can't go on with this. She has proof, enough evidence to take him down, and I will make sure he faces the consequences." Clara looked at him, confused and scared. "Will you expose it? Won't this destroy us even more?" Daniel looked up at her, pain visible on his face. "We are already destroyed, Clara. The difference is, now I have a chance to make it mean something." The conversation ended without resolution, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts while Daniel locked himself in the guest room, the door between them a physical and symbolic barrier. She spent the night awake, thinking about everything she had lost and what she could still lose. It wasn't just her marriage that was at stake, but also her image of herself. How had she allowed her life to get to this point? The next morning, Daniel met Molly at a low-key cafe to discuss their next move. She brought a folder full of documents, recordings and emails that revealed her husband's pattern of behavior. He used his position of power to manipulate, seduce and destroy. The impact of the evidence was overwhelming, but also disturbing. Daniel felt a mix of satisfaction and disgust as he analyzed each page, seeing the extent of the damage that man had caused. "We need to plan how this will be exposed." Molly spoke with determination, but there was a fragility in her voice that she tried to hide. "He will try to silence us, he will use everything he can against us. I've seen this before." Daniel nodded, but his mind was on Clara. She would be dragged into this even if she didn't want to. He knew that to protect what was left of his family, he would need to find a way to minimize the damage. The days that followed were a mixture of tension and expectation. Molly and Daniel organized the evidence, contacted lawyers and ensured the information was released to the right people. Every move was calculated, every decision made carefully to avoid reprisals. But the emotional pressure was also beginning to take its toll. Daniel was constantly torn between the desire to move on with his life and the drive to ensure justice was served. Clara, on the other hand, was experiencing internal torment. She avoided Daniel, knowing that any conversation between them would only increase the distance. But she also knew she couldn't run away forever. One night, as he was reviewing documents in his makeshift home office, she walked in hesitantly, holding an envelope. "I need to show you something." He looked at her, his expression unreadable, and gestured for her to continue. She placed the envelope on the table and walked away, as if the contents were a bomb about to explode. Daniel opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter. It was Clara's. She confessed her mistakes, explained her feelings, and talked about how she had lost her way. But what surprised him most was the last paragraph. Clara had discovered that the man in question was involved in illegal activities at the company, and she had gathered information that could be crucial to the case. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to seem like I was trying to fix things to redeem myself. But I think this could help." Daniel looked at her, surprised. "Why didn't you tell me before?" She swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Because I was afraid you would think it was a desperate attempt to earn your forgiveness. I just want this to end, Daniel. For you, for our children, for myself." He was silent for a moment, processing what she had said. Maybe it was true, maybe it was an attempt to compensate for the irreparable. But regardless of her motivations, the information she brought back could change everything. They spent the next few hours analyzing together what Clara had discovered. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of cooperation between them, even if it was fragile and full of tension. It was as if, for a brief moment, the pain and anger were set aside in the name of something greater. Daniel still didn't know if he could forgive her, but in that moment, he realized he needed her to finish what they had started. At the end of the night, as Clara retired to her room, she looked at him with an expression of timid hope. "Thank you for listening to me." Daniel didn't respond right away, but his eyes followed her as she walked up the stairs. He knew the road to any kind of resolution would be long and uncertain, but for the first time, he felt there was a glimmer of something beyond the pain, perhaps not reconciliation, but a kind of understanding. And that, for now, was enough. The days leading up to the final reveal were marked by tension and expectation. Daniel and Molly worked together with almost surgical precision, fine-tuning every detail to ensure that the evidence against the man who had caused so much damage was irrefutable. The plan was simple but bold, a public presentation organized by Molly, who would use her position in the company to expose the facts. She had enlisted the support of other colleagues who, although fearful, were willing to speak out. Clara watched everything from afar. She knew she couldn't be part of that moment, but there was a constant restlessness inside her, a mixture of guilt and hope. Despite everything, she wished Daniel could find some kind of peace after the chaos. She also knew that regardless of the outcome, their marriage was already a closed chapter. Clara spent the last few days dedicating herself to her children, trying, in some way, to reconnect with the part of her life that still seemed intact. When the day arrived, the atmosphere in the company was full of curiosity and tension. Molly had called an unexpected meeting, and the auditorium was packed with employees and executives. Daniel stood in an inconspicuous corner, watching as Molly took the stage. Her voice was firm, but it carried a weight that only he seemed to recognize. She began the presentation with a straightforward introduction, explaining that the meeting was to discuss unethical behavior within the organization. Soon, she revealed the first set of evidence, financial records that showed her husband had used company funds to maintain his illicit relationships. The impact was immediate. Murmurs began to spread throughout the auditorium, but Molly didn't stop. She presented text messages, emails, accounts from other women who had been harmed. The face of the man sitting in the front row was a mixture of anger and panic. He tried to interrupt her, but Molly continued, unabated. When she finished, there was absolute silence in the room. It was Daniel who broke the moment, standing up and moving forward to speak. He looked directly at the man and, in a controlled but emotional voice, declared that he was not just there as a personal victim, but as someone who would not allow this to continue. Daniel's words were a final blow, leaving the man with no way out. The company immediately launched a formal investigation. The man was escorted out of the building that same day as previously intimidated colleagues began sharing their own experiences. The public exposure was devastating for him, not only in the professional environment, but also in his personal life. Molly filed for divorce the next day, ending years of manipulation and abuse. She finally seemed free, even though she bore the scars of what she had endured. Daniel, in turn, did not feel immediate relief. Victory over the man brought a sense of justice, but it also highlighted the emptiness that now permeated his life. He had lost his marriage, his emotional stability and, in a way, the identity he had built alongside Clara. However, he decided it was time to start over. He sold the house they lived in together and moved to a smaller apartment where he could focus on himself and his children. Sundays were still dedicated to children, but now there was a lightness to their interactions that had previously seemed impossible. Clara faced her own path to redemption. She began going to therapy, determined to understand what led her to make so many mistakes and to rebuild her relationship with her children. They noticed the changes, although it was still difficult for Lucas to accept the distance between his parents. Clara knew that their forgiveness would take time, just like forgiving herself. A few weeks later, Daniel received an unexpected invitation from Molly for coffee. He accepted, more out of curiosity than desire. When they arrived, the conversation was relaxed, without the weight of the past that previously connected them. Molly seemed different, lighter, and Daniel noticed that she, too, was trying to rebuild her life. They talked about their children, everyday challenges and, for the first time, the future. There were no promises or expectations, just a silent understanding that they had both been through the same hell and emerged stronger. The end of that journey was more about acceptance than resolution. Clara found a way to move forward, even if it didn't include Daniel. Molly discovered the freedom that had long been denied her. And Daniel, although marked by pain, realized that there was room for something new. He still felt Clara's absence, but he knew that love, when it reappeared, would come in a different form. The cycle of destruction had ended, and in its place, a new chance for everyone was born. Now that you've heard this story, we want to know, what did you think? Do you believe the characters' choices were fair? Leave your comment and share your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories like this. Here, we show how betrayal can destroy lives, but also how it is possible to find redemption. And remember, this channel does not support any type of cheating. Until next time.